Good friends, but don't forget there are many gods like you all over the world.
Hi, welcome to the first episode in a new series that I'm calling All of the Street Fighters. I thought it'd be really fun to play every single Street Fighter game and talk about why they're all different and why they're all really great games. But aren't there like 5 million Street Fighter games? That doesn't sound fun at all. Well, you're right. There are too many Street Fighter games, and that doesn't sound fun because loads of them are just essentially exactly the same game. So there are some caveats to this. I'm going to look at all the main entries to the Street Fighter series. So, I mean, there's 7 different Street Fighter 2s. If you take just one of those, say Super Street Fighter 2 The New Challengers, there's 13 versions of Super Street Fighter 2 on various platforms. We're not going to look at them all. This isn't Digital Foundry. We're going to pick and choose, and we're going to look at the main entries in each series, and that's going to include the versus games, so Marvel vs. Capcom, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Capcom vs. SNK, all those cool kind of later games that have got a mix of characters from the series. But yeah, I mean, to start with, we're going to be looking at the core Street Fighter games. So, of course, that starts with Street Fighter 1, which was released on the PC Engine under the name Fighting Street, which is the version that we're going to look at today. Breathe. So Fighting Street, it's the first Street Fighter game, as I say. Does it share much with the later Street Fighter games? Well, kind of. There are similarities. You play Ryu. Ken is also in the game, as is Sagat. Sagat's actually the final boss. But when you play single player, you can only select Ryu. If you play 2-player versus, one player will play Ryu, one player will play Ken. If Ken wins, then that player can carry on the story mode as Ken. But that's it. That's it as far as your character options go. Ryu and Ken have got exactly the same moves in the game. They're the moves that are familiar if you've played any of the Street Fighter games. He's got his Hadouken, he's got his Dragon Punch, he's got that spinning kick thing that I can't remember the name of. But yeah, you pull them off exactly the same way. So that is similar. You'll notice the game looks very different. A lot of the later Street Fighter games, they kind of had a certain look. The developers of Street Fighter 1 quit, or well, I don't know if they quit, but they left Capcom after development was finished. And they were picked up by SNK, and later went on to make Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury. So weirdly, the people who made this game went on to make all of Street Fighter's competition in the future, which is, yeah, it's kind of hard to get your head around. But basically, in a nutshell, the people who made this game didn't make any of the other Street Fighter games. So if there are any little differences, that's possibly why. One interesting thing about the PC Engine, well, Fighting Street, is that the PC Engine controller only had 2 buttons. Street Fighter at the arcade used 6 buttons, 3 punches, 3 kicks, same as all the later Street Fighters. Because the PC Engine controller only has 2 buttons, the way they got around it is if you want to do a heavy punch, you hold down the punch button. If you want to do a heavy kick, you hold down the kick button, which makes it kind of weird to play because you almost have to charge up your move, which I found frustrating when I was playing the game because you have to kind of commit. If you want to use a heavy punch, you have to commit, and by the time I'd wound it up, I found that my opponent had jumped over my head and was at the other side of the stage, which, yeah, it's not ideal. I found the game, it's all right, but I found it quite frustrating. I think one of the things that I feel about the later Street Fighter games, basically from Street Fighter 2 onwards, is that they've aged ridiculously well. On one of the series on this channel, ranking the SNES, Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior, which is the very first Street Fighter 2 game, is currently our number 1 favourite SNES game. That shows you how well it's aged. They're just classic games. I mean, they brought out a new version of Street Fighter 2 on the Switch this year, and it was a full price, £40 game, and it's brilliant. Whereas I can't really say the same about Street Fighter 1. It's quite clunky. I mean, the technology was different when this released. It was a kind of a revolutionary game. There hadn't been many games that had done this kind of thing before. So, you know, it's not blaming the game, but it doesn't hold up as well as the later ones. It feels a bit clunky to play. The moves feel quite hard to pull off. You'll see in the video I do pull off Hadoukens and Dragon Punches every so often, but I'd say I had a 10% success rate. Maybe that's just the controller, but yeah, it just didn't feel great. I didn't feel like I was fully in control. I didn't feel like I could pull off everything I wanted to pull off to react to my enemies. So the structure of the game, you start off as Ryu. There's 4 countries to pick from: Japan, Great Britain, America, China. And you choose your starting location. there's 2 enemies in each location. So you'll have 2 fights, and then it'll move on to the next location. I picked Japan first, just because it was the first in the list. And I don't know if these move in difficulty, but I found that one a lot easier than the later ones. When I switched to starting in Great Britain, I just got absolutely destroyed by Birdie, who you'll recognise from other Street Fighter games. He was just wrecking me. Just not necessarily because his AI was amazing, but his moves were just doing tons more damage, which led me to try and do heavy punches and heavy kicks. But as I say, I had to wind them up, and I just ended up missing every time. And I'm not the best. Maybe this is just me being terrible, but I was really struggling, and I felt like if I'd had 6 buttons, maybe I might have been able to pull it off better. Maybe if I'd had an arcade stick as well, which I don't because it's a PC engine. So yes, Sagat is the final boss in this. In later games, he's the penultimate boss, but it's quite cool to see some of the later characters in Street Fighter 1. Like Ryu, obviously, he's kind of recognisable as Ryu, even though he's wearing these tiny, weird red shoes, which I'm kind of pleased that they got rid of in Street Fighter 2 and made him barefoot, because it's like he's wearing little slippers. But it's cool to see Sagat. Birdie's in there, as I said. Ken's in there. I can't think if anybody else recognisable is. But yeah, it's this little core set of characters, but it is a shame that you can only pick Ryu or Ken if you're playing 2-player. I think that's one of the downsides of this game for me. It's got no character selection, which instantly limits the replayability of it. So that's Street Fighter 1. There's not a great deal to say about it. It's probably the game that I'm most inexperienced with, so maybe that's why I'm running out of things to talk about. I haven't got a history with the game. I started on Street Fighter 2 when I was a kid. We didn't have a PC engine. We certainly didn't have an arcade machine in our house. So I haven't grown up with nostalgia for Street Fighter 1. This is me coming in as a huge Street Fighter fan and going, I wonder where it started. So yeah, the history that I've told you is kind of everything that I've found out myself. Needless to say, it's an interesting start to the series. It's really worth looking at. Is it worth playing? I think it is. It's worth playing for like historical interest. It doesn't stand up. It's not that much fun to play. I'd say jump in with any of the Street Fighters and you'll have a better time. But it's a great start, and it's a good base to move on to other Street Fighters and start to look at the differences and what they added, what some of them took away, where the character roster went. I just can't wait. I'm really looking forward to moving on to some of the later ones. I'm really looking forward to looking at Street Fighter 3, which I kind of love, and the Alpha games and the EX plus Alpha games, and there's just tons. So even though I'm going to strip this list down and only look at the main entries, we've still got a hell of a lot of Street Fighter games to go. So subscribe to the channel if you're not, and these will pop up in your newsfeed. Leave me a comment, tell me which are your favourite Street Fighter games, which ones that you'd like me to look at, so just to make sure that I don't miss them. I'm going to say that my favourite is probably Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which I'm totally including. Basically anything that's got the Street Fighter characters in and can arguably be called a Street Fighter game, we're going to look at it. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you're going to join us next time, and I can't wait to look at some more Street Fighter games. Alright, ta-ra, bye.